Straightforward question, and here is the thing. Are we walking into a police state here? You have to read the small print, and you have to be very careful and diligent when a government announces a new bill, particularly one this big. It falls upon all of us to have a good old gander at what is being said, and so often it is in those smaller paragraphs, the minute detail, somewhere buried within it, that you see the problems. This is the Police Crime and Sentencing and Courts Bill. It's a large piece of legislation. It proposes major changes to justice policy. The bill would enable police chiefs to implement more conditions on static protests, meaning they would also be able to impose start and finish times. They'd be able to set limits on things like noise. They'd apply the rules to demonstrations. And that could be just by a demonstration by just one person, by the way. So this is kind of seismic. I'll come back to the detail of that in a second. More curiously, this is where it straight away gets interesting. Everybody should be on high alert when they hear a sentence like this. The Home Secretary Priti Patel will be empowered to create laws without parliamentary approval. Now just let that settle for a second. That means to define serious disruption to communities, add organisations which the police can rely on to impose conditions on protests. If passed, the legislation will have the effect of curtailing protests near to Parliament through provisions which state access for vehicles must not be obstructed. So we're referring there mostly to what happened with Extinction Rebellion a couple of years. It would have been a couple of years ago now. Right there on Parliament Square, the whole square was completely snarled up. It was jammed up. There were issues with Westminster Bridge and ambulances trying to get across the bridge. St Thomas's Hospital sits just on the other side of the Thames there. All manner of issues surrounding that. I'll come back to the specific kind of protest in a moment, because this is just one aspect of what we want to look at this afternoon. But I mentioned at the beginning the former Prime Minister Theresa May, and she wasn't much of a PM in the big gig at number 10. Heck of a nice person and all of that. But talk about coming into your own. This is so the debate, the vote is tonight at 7 o'clock on this bill, and we'll wait with interest as to what's likely to happen there. But this was the debate that took place yesterday in the House of Commons. Priti Patel was addressing the House, and this was one of the points, one of many that Theresa May put to the current Home Secretary.
It's tempting with Home Secretary to think that giving powers to the Home Secretary is very reasonable, because we all think we're reasonable. But actually, future Home Secretaries may not be so reasonable. I wonder if the government would be willing to publish a draft of those regulations during passage of the bill so we can actually see what that are going to be and make sure that it is not also encroaching on the operational decisions of the police. So there are very important elements of this bill, but I would urge the government to consider carefully the need to walk a fine line between being popular and populist. Our freedoms depend on it.
Wow, she's bang on. Theresa is on the money. I wonder if she'd have said that had she been in number 10 herself and a similar bill was going through. 0344 499 1000. Are we walking into a bit of a police state here? And I mentioned the issue of Extinction Rebellion protests, huge disruptions. Most of us thought this was it was impractical to have a protest where they had a protest. The right to protest clashed with your right to go about your business. So there was a big problem there. So if it's a bunch of soap-dodging hippies having a protest, then we probably think the Home Secretary is right here. Yeah, absolutely right. She should be able to ban the protest. That's a terrible thing. But what if it's something you feel really strongly about? What if Jenny Jones's perverse dream of having a 6 p.m. curfew for men came to fruition? Now, that'd be worth a protest, wouldn't it? What if Jenny Jones happened to be the Home Secretary, though? You begin to see the problem. If it's something you feel strongly about, do you really want to hand over such seismic powers, such almost totalitarian powers, over to one individual? So the Home Secretary and of course, it won't always be Priti Patel. It'll be somebody else. You never know which government's going to come through next. If the Labour Party, imagine Lloyd Russell Moyle being your Home Secretary, some character like that, and then saying you wanted a protest about X, Y, Z, and he alone, at the mere swipe of a quill across a piece of governmental parchment, could change the law based on what he fancied. No parliamentary approval needed. The Home Secretary could just change it. That is a police state. OK, let's not try and dress it up as anything else. The Prime Minister, however, he seems to think there's nothing to see here and people should support this bill.
I hope everybody will support this bill tomorrow because it's actually a very sensible package of measures which goes much further in toughening sentences for rapists, for stopping the early release of serious sexual and violent offenders, and it takes some new tough action against domestic violence. And I think I hope very much that everybody in the House of Commons votes for that bill tomorrow.
And he's just articulated the problem. There is a lot in there that does make sense. Changing sentencing rules. Serious criminals spend more time in jail before they can be conditionally released. Judges would be allowed to consider jailing child murderers for their entire lives. Maximum sentences for low-level assaults against emergency services. That is set to double from 1 year to 2. On terrorism, the bill creates power to more closely monitor offenders that have been released from prison. We've found out to our cost what happens when you don't monitor those people that have been imprisoned previously for terrorist offences. Community sentences for less serious crime to address underlying problems in offenders' lives. Changes to the sexual offences law to tackle abusive adults in positions of trust like sports coaches and religious figures. And you look at all of that and you say, well, that's a rather good thing. There's other elements in that bill you might not much like. We'll talk to Ian Dunt in a bit and Shaun Bailey, who's standing for the Mayor of London for the Conservatives, and get their perspective on this. 0344 499 1000. But the area you should be supremely uncomfortable with is the point of protest. Now, I know the whole notion, the whole art of protest, if you like, has changed beyond recognition in recent years. It takes nothing now to organise a protest. It would have taken months before to try and galvanise a bunch of people to turn up at Parliament Square to make their views known on a particular issue. Today, well, you just go onto Twitter and you do that. Facebook, you can all get very, very easy. Just get your mates, like this post, retweet this, and we'll see you on the 5th down there at Parliament Square. Job done. It's never been easier to have a protest. We also live in a time as well where people quite like protesting. There is, it seems, a vogue right now of everybody finding their own victim status somewhere along the line and something to grumble about. No bad thing in one respect, but it does mean I think we all have to acknowledge that protesting and the way protest works has changed. So yes, they might have to take a look at it. But do you really want to give a Home Secretary the full power to decide a Caesar-like thumbs up or thumbs down as to whether your disgruntlement gets the go-ahead or not? No parliamentary approval, not even necessarily a nod from the old bill, just merely the Home Secretary deciding, yep, I think that one's okay, I don't like this one very much. It is absolutely fundamental that people have the right to protest. It's never lost on me that you can walk past the Houses of Parliament and right in the shadow of the mother of all parliaments there, right on College Green and Parliament Square as well, people holding banners protesting about all manner of issues, from Tamil Tigers still to the invasion of Iraq. Everything you could imagine has been protested in that square, right under the gazing eye of the Houses of Parliament. That is fantastic that we have that. It's amazing that we have that. We should never want to lose that. So the idea that a Home Secretary can come along and the brush of a signature change that should worry the life out of all of us. And if that wasn't bothering you, let me just factor in a separate story here, which again, on the face of it, a lot of these power, I can't remember what the famous quotation is about security and the art of giving you what looks like a very secure and beautiful put together policy that will protect us, in fact, only to discover that it's the very thing that eats up our democracy. Pubs, immediate steps aimed at improving the safety for women and girls in England and Wales has been announced by Number 10. This, of course, comes in the wake of what happened to Sarah Everard. Among those is an additional £25 million for better lighting. Who wouldn't like that? More CCTV. Okay. And then a pilot scheme which could see, or would see, plainclothes police officers in pubs and clubs. Stop right there. Stop right there. There's not a person in the land that doesn't want to protect the safety of women. Who would say otherwise? Just think about this. Plainclothes cops in pubs and clubs. The word Stasi comes to mind, and so it should do. Is this where we've arrived at in the 21st century? We've got a Home Secretary deciding on what you can protest about, And we've now got a law that's going to mean that cops are undercover while you're out drinking. That's a democracy? That's freedom? Really? Yes, every government does. I mean, they will tell you till they're blue in the face that no, we don't want more power. No, we're about a small. Every government loves more power. Labour and the Tories are heading for a fierce showdown on crime after Sir Keir Starmer ordered his MPs to vote against a flagship piece of government legislation. I noticed Jerry Hayes on talkRADIO earlier saying that he thinks they will vote for it. MPs are voting on the police crime sentencing and courts bill at the end of a two-day Commons debate dominated by clashes about protection for women and curbs on demonstrations. The wide-ranging crime crackdown will provide more control for policing of protests, including the power to impose start and finishing times, as well as setting noise limits as well. In a moment, we'll talk to Shaun Bailey, Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London. First, Ian Dunn, author and editor of politics.co.uk. You've written a lot on this, Ian. I'm looking at some of the headlines, however, of what's included in this bill. Changing sentences so that criminals spend more time in jail, looking at people who've been released having committed terror offences. We've paid the price for not doing that in the past. Sexual offences laws. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff here. What's not to like?
Well, you could cut it up. I mean, basically, this is one of those typical government bills, right, where they just take every single little thing that they want to do and they stuff it into this document. So I think it's about 295 pages on this thing. It's huge, absolutely massive. It covers all sorts of different areas: digital communication, travellers' camps, protests. The bits that are troubling are predominantly the protest elements. And those are really the areas that we've been mostly discussing. So, I mean, I guess the question, what you just said is basically what Tory MPs were saying to Labour MPs yesterday, saying, well, if you like this stuff, why don't you vote for it? I think the question is the other way around, is if you really care about their sentencing provisions, why did you stuff it full of this much more contentious, much more controversial attack on freedom of speech? Why would you put your criminal justice elements at risk of people protesting against your efforts against demonstration?
And it's interesting, I keep picking out this line that the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, I mean, fascinating, by the way, I'm sure you'll agree with this, to see Theresa May coming into her own in the Houses of Parliament yesterday, making some cracking points on this, and particularly this business of the Home Secretary being empowered to create laws without parliamentary approval. I mean, that should send the fear of God into most of us.
This is incredible, right? So, I mean, most of our rules on protest have this phrase, serious disruption, in them, right? That's the point where the police get to intervene. They say, no, we're going to take care of this. The buses have to be able to go past, etc. There's a point in this bill where Priti Patel gives herself the power to define what serious disruption means in future without consulting Parliament. She's using something called statutory instruments. So she just gets to, in the future, just decide, actually, no, we're going to lower the threshold now. Now, what gets me about this is she could have just put it in the bill. If she wants to change the definition of this term, she could just put it in the legislation, people vote on it, we will have a debate about it, and that's how that passes. Instead, she just said, from now on, these words are going to mean whatever I say they mean. And to see Theresa May, I mean, Theresa May, you know, she was many things, but she was not a liberal Home Secretary. This is someone who was quite authoritarian, who was quite law and order. To see her get up and go, hang on a minute, you're giving yourself too much power here. You need to be careful. Should give you an indication of just how broad the consensus is about these kind of powers.
Indeed. And as she rightly said, every Home Secretary thinks they're a nice person. But you don't know what you're going to get next. I mean, you know, you could have Lloyd Russell Moyle as the Home Secretary. Imagine that horror show. I don't expect you to comment, of course, on that. However, but the point is, and that's set against what we have at the moment. That's how bad things could be. So, I mean, but this is a very serious point, isn't it, about protest? I mean, it's all very well saying, oh, look, Extinction Rebellion, they clogged up the roads. It's a bunch of, you know, smelly hippies. Nobody cares about them. Just let us get about our business. And if somebody has that view, that's fine. But what happens when the protest is something you do feel strongly about and the tune then changes?
Well, the thing is, I mean, most of the actions that Extinction Rebellion took that have been discussed in the Commons recently. So do you remember when they closed down the printing presses for certain newspapers, when they jumped on the tube train? I mean, I wasn't a fan of that. That just seems to me like a really terrible, terrible way to try and promote your ideas. But there's a reason that those printing presses started working again. There's a reason that those guys aren't still chained to a tube train. And that's that we already have laws against these kinds of protests. We have laws that stop serious disruption. Yesterday in the Commons, Tory MP after Tory MP stood up and went, we've got to have laws that stop people from doing this. You just think that is a completely redundant point. We already have those laws. What this law does is something different. It says you can't make noise. If one person, no, I beg your pardon, let me put this properly. If a policeman suspects that at some point during the protest, one person walking by might be alarmed by the noise, they can impose restrictions on it. Now, that is not freedom of speech, and it doesn't matter what view those protesters are doing. That is not freedom of speech, and yet I heard not one single defender of the bill yesterday, 6 hours of debate, whether they're a minister or a Tory MP, actually try to defend that measure. They simply pretended it wasn't there.
Indeed. Ian, thank you. Ian Dunn, author, editor of politics.co.uk. Let's speak to Shaun Bailey, Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London. This is the man, of course, who hopes to be in charge of policing in the capital. Shaun Bailey, good afternoon to you. You heard what Ian Dunn said there, that we should be deeply worried, not about the stuff that does make sense, but about the stuff that clearly doesn't.
I heard Ian's comments, and look, Ian's a very clever, considered man, but here in London, we are focused on our crime epidemic and what do we do to deal with that. And he dismissed Extinction Rebellion's actions as if they weren't impactful for London. Let me tell you, my friend, if you work for a living, those days made a big difference to you. You had no work to support your living. We do need some effect. And I'd start by saying this. We have a current set of laws that meant Sadiq Khan let Extinction Rebellion protests go ahead, but didn't do anything to support the vigil for Sarah. Something's wrong here, and we need to address that. And that's why this bill, and it's a tough bill, this for sure, but it's also full of some very good things, is contentious. I see that, but it needs to go through.
But you don't surely want to give a Home Secretary that much power. As a Conservative, Shaun, you wouldn't surely want to say one person should have the authority to decide on a whim what they think is a legit protest and what they think isn't.
Look, I could get deep into the weeds on this, but if we take...
Go for it. I'd like you to get deep on this, Shaun. Tell us more.
Okay, here we go. Here we go, Ian. I think our entire system, of course, which our law sits in, our parliamentary democracy, means that one person won't just wake up one morning, Home Secretary or not, and make the rule. It's not quite that simple. It never has been.
But that's what they want to put into this bill.
Hold on. I take you back to the Iraq War. The Prime Minister had that power then. There was much more debate than everybody just wandering off to war. You know, these powers are necessary if you see what's happening in London. We have a crime epidemic. We want a fresh start. We need someone to take charge, and we need that help here. We have people being murdered in the street at an 11-year high. The demonstrations in response to that, and nothing happening. We need some direction here. We need that fresh start.
What about the other aspect of legislation at the moment, separate to this bill, of having undercover police officers sitting in bars, a kind of what some have described as a Stasi-like approach to dealing with a problem? Again,
the way I would see it is this. We have other mechanisms to make sure that those police officers don't do things beyond decent behaviour. But you've got to look at the nature of protest and the nature of crime. It has evolved. So you look at protests now, people come and glue themselves to the floor, whereas beforehand we'd march, we'd sing, we'd wave banners or whatever. People are doing different things, so we need a different legal response. Look at crime. You're a national show, so your people be fed up a little bit of hearing of London. But let me tell you why it's important to you. The crime in London is so bad under our current mayor, we now export it to the rest of the country. We need the ability to deal with that. Look how much domestic violence rose in the pandemic period. We need ways to respond to that, and we can't kick all that out. We have a problem in London that is spreading across the country that needs proper law and order to sort it out.
But are we not walking to a police state? Final question.
I'd say no. And let's be clear, we have a democracy. If we wanted into a police state, we could unwind that. But the clear thing is this, London has a crime epidemic under the current mayor. It needs to be sorted out. We need a fresh start, and that's why we need someone who's going to take charge and show leadership.
All right, Shaun, thank you. Shaun Bailey, Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London, naturally allowing for the fact that he's obviously looking for the big gig down in the metropolis. His wider point there, affecting us all, is that this doesn't echo a police state. It's curious that I find myself in agreement with Ian Dunn and not in agreement with the point that Shaun Bailey has just made, because this legislation absolutely does have a horrible whiff of statism about it that I think should worry us all.